Picture a normal evening in Delhi. The air is getting cooler, the streets are just buzzing with people heading home, and the area around the famous Red Fort is alive. And then, in a single instant, that whole scene is just shattered by a massive explosion. So what exactly happened on that chaotic night? And how did the city even begin to respond? Well, let's break it all down. This one line, wow, it just says it all, doesn't it? It gets right to the heart of the horror of that evening. It really speaks to the suddenness of it all, the sheer terror that ripped through a place that's supposed to be about history and daily life. It's a tough reminder of just how fragile peace can be. So to really get it, we've got to go back to the start. All right, to get the full picture, let's piece together the timeline of what happened, moment by moment. Now, the timing here is absolutely critical. This wasn't some random hour. This was 6:30 p.m., right in the middle of peak rush hour. The area near the Red Fort Metro was packed with commuters. An explosion at that time, in that exact spot, that doesn't feel like an accident. It feels calculated for maximum impact. And just minutes later, the first responders were on site, walking into an absolute nightmare. Just try to imagine that scene for a second. A deafening blast, a car completely swallowed by flames, and this thick, choking smoke just filling the air. Panic erupts. People are just running, trying to save their lives, with no idea what's even going on. The first reports that came in confirmed the worst. There were multiple casualties, and many people were injured. It was total chaos. So, right in the middle of all that chaos, the first responders arrived, and what they did in those first few minutes was absolutely critical. So how is an emergency like this actually handled on the ground? Well, the response follows a really clear practice protocol. Priority number 1 is containment. You got to seal off the roads, shut down the metro, and stop any more harm from happening. Next, you deploy security forces to lock down the scene itself, while the entire city is put on high alert. And then, and this is so crucial for the investigation, the forensic teams get to work immediately, racing against the clock to figure out what happened. Okay, so once the scene was secure, the real investigation could begin. As the forensic teams carefully sifted through the wreckage of that car, they found the very first critical clue, a piece of evidence that would end up defining the entire case. And that key piece of evidence was an IED, an improvised explosive device. Finding an IED confirms this was no accident. The blast was deliberate. The device was built for one reason, to cause destruction. And that discovery, it shifted the entire investigation from a possible tragedy to a definite act of terrorism. And the details they found about this IED were, well, they were chilling. The explosive used was military grade, which is incredibly powerful and really hard to get your hands on. This told investigators 2 huge things. First, the people behind this were part of an organized, well-structured group. And second, this was not a spontaneous act. No way. This was a pre-planned attack that had been in the works for days. So, of course, this became the central question, right? The one driving the entire investigation. Finding the device was a huge step, but finding the people behind it and figuring out their motive, that was the real challenge. The question now was, how far did this thing go? Investigators started pulling on every single thread they could find, looking for signs that this one blast was actually part of a much larger, more sinister conspiracy. Investigators, they cast a huge net. They started with the car itself, tracing its ownership, figuring out how in the world it got there. They combed through hours and hours of CCTV footage to map its route. They pulled phone records from the whole area, looking for any weird communication patterns. And at the very same time, they were cross-referencing all this evidence with known terror networks and interrogating the first people they took into custody. Now, while the full investigation is still going on, a pretty clear working theory has started to form. The motive seems simple and just brutal. To spread widespread terror and panic, likely timed to create as much public fear as possible. But the response wasn't just happening on the streets with the investigators. Oh no, it went all the way to the top. The city and the national government moved incredibly fast to manage the fallout and beef up security across the entire capital. You can really see the government's 2-pronged approach here. On one side, you have the action on the ground, a joint investigation pulling together multiple agencies to solve the crime. At the same time, you have the directives coming from the highest levels. We're talking high-level meetings, orders to increase security citywide, and a direct appeal to the public to stay calm. And that appeal to the public, it's so important. Because after the first responders do their job and leave the scene, preventing the next attack becomes a shared responsibility. And this, right here, is where every single one of us has a role to play.
You know, this was way more than just a generic message. It was a direct call to action. The authorities were making it crystal clear that the public's eyes and ears are one of the most powerful tools we have for preventing future attacks.
So, what can we actually do? Well, the official advice for all of us is really practical and direct. First thing, stop the spread of panic by refusing to pass on rumors. If you see anything that feels off, a strange object, a vehicle, a person, report it immediately. Be extra aware when you're in crowded places, and always remember that the Delhi Police Helpline, 112, is always active. You know, in all of this analysis, it is so important that we remember the human element. Lives were lost and lives were changed forever. Our thoughts are, of course, with the families who lost people they loved. This event is also just a stark reminder of the incredible dedication of our security forces, the people who run towards danger to protect the rest of us. Ultimately, an incident like this in Delhi forces all of us to think about the role we play in our own collective safety. And it leaves us with a really critical question. Is our shared vigilance, our looking out for one another, truly our greatest security? Picture a normal evening in Delhi. The air is